In some business cases, we are not going to need a column in a table anymore. And there is a way to remove it completely with all the data present in it. Dropping is performed by altering table. This is a command that we already learned in prior lectures. Remember that the constraints on a column are also dropped when dropping a column. And remember that we cannot drop all the columns which are present in the table. So one column in a table has to exist. Just a reminder that the maximum number of columns in an Oracle table can be 1000. Let's go to some examples to see how this works. So in my SQL developer, I'm going to create a table, and it's going to have 4 columns, 1 ID column and 3 string columns. Okay, let's create it. The table is created. And for example, I want to drop the text column 1. So if I check now, we can see that there are 3 text columns present and 1 ID column. And I want to drop the text column 1. I'm doing this with the alter table statement. So the syntax is alter, object type, object name, which is the multi-column table over here, and drop column and the name of the column. So let's execute this one. We can see the table is altered, and let's check the table. As we can see, the table column underscore 1 has been removed. There is also another syntax with which we can drop columns from a table, which is alter table, table name, drop, and in the brackets, name of the columns we want to drop. In this example, I could have had only 1 column, but by this way, we can drop multiple columns straight away. Let's test it out, and we can see the table has been altered, and we can see the 2 text columns have been removed. Let's drop that table as we are not going to need it. When we have tables with relation with primary and foreign key, we have to go by some rules. So for this example, I'm going to create a primary table, which has a column prime ID, which is a primary key, and a text column with varchar type. And I'm going to create a table that references that primary table. My prime ID over here has a foreign key on the primary table, on this one, on the column prime ID. So if I want to drop the column from primary table, which has a reference from another table, this is not going to work straight away. So if I try to execute this command, as we learned prior, this errors, as that column has a reference from another table. We can override this by adding the cascade constraints keywords to it. So this command will drop the prime ID column on the primary table and all the constraints that are associated with it. So my constraint, which I created on the reference table, will be also dropped. As we can see, the primary table has been altered, and the prime ID on the primary table should have been removed. Let's check it out. Now only 1 column should be present, which is that text column 1. And it is here. Let's remove those tables as we don't need them at. There is also a way to remove column from a table, but in much faster way. And this is to set it as unused. Have in mind, when we set a column unused, the data on the database still exists, but we cannot access it or roll back our unused command in any way. Also, the same as for dropping columns, we cannot set all tables as unused, as we need to have at least 1 column present in the table. And if we recall, the maximum number of columns in a table is 1000. If we set a column in a table to unused, the count of columns counts towards the total number of columns in a table. For example, if we had 10 columns in a table and we set 2 unused to it, the total number of columns in a table will remain as 10 until we drop them. Let's go to example to see how this works. So again, I'm going to create a multi-column table over here with 4 columns. That table is created. And in the same fashion as when dropping, we are altering a table and we are setting a column as unused. The syntax is alter table, table name, set unused column, and which column we want to set as unused. If we check the multi-column table at the moment, we can see it has 4 columns. And we're gonna set the text column 1 as unused. The table is altered. Let's check that table. And we can see only 3 columns remain. In the same fashion, we can set multiple columns as unused. Again, we're omitting the column keyword and adding all the columns we want to set unused in brackets. Let's execute this one. And now the text column 2 and text column 3 should have been set as unused. Let's check this, and we can see we have only 1 column remaining. We can check unused columns from the user unused call tabs table, and we can see only the count of unused columns that are present at the moment on the database. Let's recall that we cannot roll back or return in any way those columns. All the data exists somewhere on the database, but we cannot access it in any way. We can also drop those unused columns. That means that the space on the database will be released, as in it could be used by some other data. We can do that with the alter table, the table name on which we want to drop unused columns, and drop unused columns. And execute this. Now our table has been altered, and if I check the unused call tabs table, we can see that there are no more unused tables present on the database. A sole purpose why we shouldn't drop a column in a table but set it unused is that it's much faster. When we are dropping our column in a table, resources from the actual hardware is used to delete all the data which is present. When setting the column unused, we are changing only the metadata on the database. So setting the column unused on a table is practically instant. So this is it for this one, and see you in the next one.